after a single mother's viral video showed her outrage at losing federal child care aid. President Trump's attempt to brand Representative Crockett a disloyal newcomer backfired, prompting Crockett to declare that her loyalty is to mothers like her, not to a president cutting their lifelines. The digital whiplash was immediate. Within an hour of the president's social media post, the split-screen arguments were already raging across cable news. On one side was the president's blunt, capitalized demand for fealty. On the other was the searing C-SPAN clip of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, methodically dismantling the administration's policy with cold, hard facts. The president's attack was meant to be a kill shot, a public dressing down of a freshman who had gotten too loud. Instead, it became the fuel for a conflagration he could not control, as millions of people watched a single mother from Ohio become the face of a national debate, and a Texas congresswoman become her unlikely champion. The Tuesday before the firestorm, President Donald Trump was in a celebratory mood. Seated at the head of the long table in the cabinet room, he surveyed his team with immense satisfaction. His signature second-term legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, had consolidated numerous federal agencies, and the initial reports from his Office of Management and Budget were, in his view, spectacular. He held up a thick, bound document. "Look at these numbers," he boomed, letting the document drop to the table with a theatrical thud. "Downsizing, efficiency, savings. We're cutting the fat like nobody has ever cut the fat before. Billions saved. Billions!" His aides nodded enthusiastically. A junior staffer, eager to please, pointed to a specific line item. "Sir, the consolidation of the Health and Human Services Grants Program alone is projected to save over $2 billion this quarter." Trump grinned. $2 billion. See? That's what I'm talking about. That's winning. He leaned back, his confidence filling every corner of the room. He viewed Congress not as a co-equal branch of government, but as a bothersome board of directors that occasionally needed to be reminded who the CEO was. He saw oversight hearings as political theater, a petty annoyance staged by opponents who couldn't accept his victory. Later that afternoon, his chief of staff handed him a brief on rising public discontent over the specific budget cuts, mentioning a trending video about child care subsidies. Trump waved a dismissive hand without looking up from his notes. "It's nothing. Liberal whining. They'll find something else to cry about next week. The important thing is loyalty. Are our people staying loyal? Are they defending the bill?" For him, the equation was simple. You were either with him, defending his wins, or you were the enemy. Miles away, in a cramped office in the Rayburn House office building, Jasmine Crockett was looking at the human cost of that $2 billion. Her desk was littered with files, but her attention was fixed on her computer monitor. Her chief of staff, a weary but sharp man named David, stood beside her. "We've had over 300 calls to the district office about this since Monday," he said, gesturing to the screen. "They all tell a similar story, but this one is going viral." On the screen was Brielle Turner, a 28-year-old single mother from Dayton, Ohio, filming on her phone in her car. Her face was pale with exhaustion and fury. Her voice cracked, but it didn't break. "I just left my son's daycare," she said, her breath fogging in the cold Ohio air. "They handed me a letter. The federal subsidy program is gone. Just gone. It was cut in the new budget. That subsidy was half my daycare payment. It was the only reason I could afford to work the night shift at the factory. So what do I do now? Quit my job? The job I love? The job that puts food on our table? The president is on TV talking about billions saved. Mr. President, you didn't save $1 billion. You just took away my son's future. You just took away my ability to work." The video ended. Crockett leaned back, her jaw tight. As a former public defender, she had seen this 100 times before. A system designed to be impenetrable, crushing ordinary people under the weight of its own bureaucracy. The faces were different, but the story was the same. A line item on a budget in Washington, D.C., translated to a family's ruin in Dayton, Ohio. "They're sending Alastair Finch to the hearing tomorrow," David said quietly. Deputy Secretary from OMB. He was the architect of these cuts. He'll just talk in circles about fiscal streamlining and programmatic consolidation. Crockett stared at the frozen image of Brielle Turner on her screen. She clicked replay. "No, he won't," she said, her voice low and determined. "Tomorrow, Mr. Finch is going to meet Brielle Turner." It wasn't about scoring political points or getting on cable news. It was about giving a voice to a woman in a car in Ohio who felt like the entire world had just been stolen from her. It was about showing that someone in the halls of power saw her, heard her, and was willing to fight for her. The next day, the House Oversight Committee room buzzed with the low hum of procedural business. Alastair Finch, the OMB Deputy Secretary, sat at the witness table, a picture of bureaucratic confidence. He was in his late 40s, with a perfectly tailored suit, and a condescending smile he deployed whenever a question veered into uncomfortable territory. He had successfully stonewalled 3 other members of the committee, drowning them in jargon and statistics until their 5-minute clocks ran out. He spoke of synergistic budget realignments and optimizing taxpayer value, his voice a smooth, passionless drone. He was a master of saying nothing while appearing to say a great deal. Then, the chairman recognized the gentlewoman from Texas. Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone. The room's ambient noise seemed to fade. She didn't look at her notes. She looked directly at Alastair Finch. "Good afternoon, Mr. Finch," she began, her tone even and professional. "I'd like to talk about your programmatic consolidations. Are you familiar with a woman named Brielle Turner from Dayton, Ohio?" Finch blinked. The question was out of left field. He was prepared for fiscal arguments, not personal anecdotes. "Congresswoman," he began, the condescending smile already forming, "I am not familiar with every individual citizen, as you can imagine. My office oversees a budget of trillions." "I'm sure," Crockett replied, her voice remaining level. "But Miss Turner is a citizen whose life has been directly impacted by the efficiency savings you've been celebrating. In fact, so many people are interested in her story that over 5 million of them have watched her talk about it in the last 24 hours. Crockett nodded to a staffer. On the large screens behind Finch, which had been displaying budget charts, Brielle Turner's face appeared. The audio of her raw, emotional video filled the hearing room. "You just took away my son's future. You just took away my ability to work." The clip ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Finch shifted in his seat, his smug composure finally cracking. He had been ambushed, not by data, but by a human being. "Congresswoman, that is an unfortunate, anecdotal case," he stammered. "But the overall fiscal health of the nation—" "Let's talk about the health of the nation, Mr. Finch," Crockett interjected, her voice sharpening, taking on the cadence of a prosecutor zeroing in on a witness. "The $2.4 billion you saved by eliminating this program. Ms. Turner calls that her ability to go to work. Can you explain the efficiency for the nation in her losing her job and likely having to apply for unemployment benefits, which are also funded by the federal government?" Finch opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely off script. "Well, the models project long-term. Forget the models, Mr. Finch. Let's talk about reality. In your prepared testimony, you used the phrase, streamlining services for American families 6 times. For Brielle Turner's 5-year-old son, streamlining means he is no longer in a safe, accredited, early learning environment while his mother is at work. Is that the stream you intended to put him in? Is an unsupervised apartment the optimized taxpayer value you were aiming for?" Her questions were relentless, each one a direct jab connecting his bureaucratic language to its devastating real-world consequence. Finch's face was now flushed. "This is an unfair characterization," he protested weakly. "The program had redundancies. There was waste." "Was Brielle Turner's job waste, Mr. Finch?" Crockett fired back, her voice rising slightly with controlled indignation. "Was her son's safety a redundancy? You came here today to talk about the billions you saved. I want you to look at that screen, at that mother's face, and explain to the American people what your savings actually cost." Finch stared blankly at the screen, then at the committee members, looking for an ally, an objection, a lifeline. He found none. The room was silent, captivated by the dismantling. Crockett leaned forward for her final point, her voice dropping back to a low, lethal calm. "This isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's not about models or projections. It's about loyalty. A government's first loyalty is to its people, to their safety, their security, and their ability to build a decent life. It seems your office has forgotten that. You came here to defend a budget, but you can't even defend its impact on one single mother. I have no further questions for this witness." She put down her microphone. The gavel banged to end her time, but the sound echoed in a room that had been fundamentally changed. Alastair Finch sat there, a man made of talking points, utterly defeated by a story he had never bothered to learn. A clip of the exchange was online before he had even packed his briefcase. As Jasmine Crockett walked out of the hearing room, a swarm of reporters converged, a frantic mess of microphones, cameras, and shouted questions. "Congresswoman, was that a coordinated attack on the OMB? Are you accusing the president of deliberately targeting single mothers? What message do you have for the White House?" Her chief of staff, David, tried to form a protective barrier, but Crockett held up a hand, stopping him. She stepped forward, her expression unyielding. "I have no message for the White House," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "My message was for my constituents and for every family like Brielle Turner's. I suggest the administration listen to them. That's who we work for." With that, she turned and walked down the marble hallway, leaving the media scrum to feast on the soundbite. Back in the hearing room, Alastair Finch was being ushered out a side door by two panicked aides, his face a mask of humiliation. The video of his public evisceration was already racking up views in the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. It was shared by political commentators, celebrities, and, most importantly, by millions of ordinary people who saw their own struggles reflected in Brielle Turner's story, and their own frustrations channeled through Crockett's pointed questions. The narrative was simple and devastating. The government had been caught red-handed, unable to justify its policies to the very people it was supposed to serve. Aboard Air Force One, flying to a rally in Wisconsin, President Trump watched the clip on a large monitor. He wasn't seeing a debate on fiscal policy. He saw a spectacle. He saw a freshman Democrat, someone he considered a political nobody, grandstanding and making his administration look weak and foolish. He saw a calculated act of disrespect. His jaw tightened. "Who is this woman?" he snapped at an aide. "She's playing for the cameras, total lightweight, trying to make a name for herself by attacking us." To him, Crockett's pointed questioning wasn't oversight. It was insubordination. It wasn't about Brielle Turner. It was about embarrassing him, Donald J. Trump. The success of his One Big Beautiful Bill was being tarnished by a single, viral clip. He stewed for a moment, the anger building. Then he pulled out his phone. His thumbs moved with practiced speed across the screen. He didn't consult his communications director or his chief of staff. He acted on pure, unfiltered instinct. A moment later, a post went out to his hundreds of millions of followers. It read, "The failing Democrats are at it again. A freshman congresswoman, who nobody ever heard of, gets on TV and cries for the cameras. She should show some respect and loyalty to her country and her president instead of always trying to be a star. We need strength, not weakness." MAGA! The president's post was meant to be a show of force, a public swatting of a gnat. Instead, it was an accelerant poured onto a raging fire. The backlash was instantaneous and overwhelming. If Crockett's hearing performance had been a story about policy, Trump's attack transformed it into a story about power. News alerts blared on phones nationwide. President Trump attacks Congresswoman who grilled his official on child care cuts. The internet erupted. The split-screen narrative became even starker. On one side, a president demanding personal loyalty. On the other, a congresswoman who had just demonstrated her loyalty to a struggling citizen. The comments under the president's post were a deluge of outrage. Loyalty to the president? How about loyalty to the Constitution, one user wrote. Another posted, "He's not angry she was playing for the cameras. He's angry she exposed the truth." The very people Trump relied on for his base Working-class voters who felt forgotten were now watching one of their own being defended by a Democrat while being attacked by the president for demanding an answer. The hashtag #LoyaltyToBrielle began to trend. Back in her D.C. office, the atmosphere was electric. Phones rang off the hook. David, her chief of staff, was pacing back and forth, a phone pressed to his ear. "No, we have no comment yet. We'll release a statement shortly." He hung up and looked at Crockett, who was sitting at her desk, calmly watching the chaos unfold on her screen. "CNN wants you on at 8. MSNBC wants you for their lead story." "The New York Times is on hold," David said, his voice a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. "We need a strategy. We hit back hard. We issue a press release condemning the president's attack on a member of a co-equal branch of government. We call it an abuse of power." Another staffer chimed in. "We can frame this as an attack on all women who speak up." Crockett listened, nodding slowly. But she wasn't looking at the cable news chyrons or the offers pouring in. She clicked a new tab on her browser and navigated to the social media page of Brielle Turner. The original video was still there, now with over 10 million views. Beneath it were thousands of new comments, many of them referencing the president's attack. "Stay strong," one said. "Representative Crockett has your back." Crockett took a deep breath, tuning out the strategic chatter in her office. A press conference would make it about her versus Trump. A cable news hit would turn it into just another partisan squabble. The president had tried to make her the story, to paint her as an ambitious star-seeker. She refused to take the bait. The story wasn't her. The story was Brielle. She leaned forward and began to type. She didn't tag the president. She didn't tag a news organization. She found Brielle Turner's original post and left a direct reply, a public comment for anyone to see. Her message was simple and direct, containing only 3 short sentences. "This is who I'm loyal to. This is why I came to Washington. And I will not be quiet." She hit post. The comment landed like a quiet thunderclap. In a world of noisy, performative outrage, her response was a model of focused, powerful clarity. It recentered the entire conversation in an instant. It wasn't about her ambition. It was about her purpose. It wasn't an attack on the president. It was a promise to a citizen. A screenshot of her reply next to the president's angry post became the definitive image of the entire affair, a digital diptych of 2 vastly different ideas of power. One was demanding loyalty from a position of authority. The other was pledging it. Hours later, long after the sun had set over the Capitol dome, Jasmine Crockett finally let herself into her small, quiet D.C. apartment. The adrenaline that had fueled her for the past 36 hours had evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She dropped her keys on the counter and sank onto the sofa. The silence of the room a stark contrast to the noise that had consumed her day. Her phone, which she had set to silent, glowed with a relentless stream of notifications. Hundreds of emails, thousands of social media mentions, dozens of missed calls. It felt less like a device and more like a contained explosion. She ignored it and kicked off her shoes, rubbing her tired eyes. The public victory felt distant now, replaced by the private reality of the fight. She had poked the most powerful man in the world, and the consequences of that were only just beginning to unfold. Her phone buzzed with a call she couldn't ignore. It was her mother, she answered, forcing a lightness into her voice she didn't feel. "Hey, Mom." "Jasmine Felicia Crockett." Her mother's voice came through, a familiar mix of pride and worry. "Don't you, hey Mom me. I saw it. I saw it all. I am so proud of you, baby. You have no idea. You stood up there and you spoke the truth like you always have." Crockett smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in hours. "Thanks, Mom. I appreciate that." "But Jasmine," her mother's tone shifted, the pride edged with fear. "You know who you're dealing with. That man, on the television, he doesn't just disagree with people. He tries to destroy them. He doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. You be careful. Please, promise me you'll be careful." "I'll be careful, Mom. I promise." Crockett said, the words feeling heavier than they should. After they hung up, she finally opened her official email, steeling herself. Her staff had already set up filters, but some of the vitriol still bled through. For every 10 messages of support, there was one filled with a venom that made her stomach clench. They were filled with racist slurs, misogynistic threats, and conspiracies about her motives. One email, with the subject line, "Loyalty," contained a string of graphic threats against her and her family. Another had attached a doctored photo of her with a target over her face. This was the other side of the viral coin. This was the private cost of public courage. She wasn't just a congresswoman in a political fight anymore. She was a target. She closed the laptop, the glow of the screen vanishing, and sat in the darkness, the weight of the day, the fight, and the threats settling upon her. She had won the battle, but the war had just begun. The week that followed was a blur of calculated noise. The White House press secretary repeatedly defended the president's post, labeling Crockett an agent of the radical left, who was more interested in fame than facts. Pro-administration media outlets ran segments questioning her patriotism and digging into her past as a public defender, trying to frame her as soft on crime. Yet, the attack wasn't landing. For every pundit who attacked her, there seemed to be 3 more defending not her politics, but the principle of her actions. The story had become too big for the administration to control. The image of Brielle Turner's tear-streaked face was now inextricably linked with Crockett's calm, defiant promise. The debate simmered, a partisan stalemate, until the following Sunday morning, when the ground unexpectedly shifted. Senator Marcus Caldwell, a moderate, silver-haired Republican from Maine, was a guest on a major political talk show. A 30-year veteran of the Senate and a notorious institutionalist who was not running for re-election, Caldwell was widely respected as a man who chose his words with precision. The host, eager for conflict, played the clip of Crockett's questioning, followed by the president's tweet. "Senator," the host began, "the White House says this is another example of Democrats refusing to respect the president. Is Congresswoman Crockett being disloyal?" Senator Caldwell adjusted his glasses, looking not at the host but directly into the camera. He sighed, a quiet expression of weary disappointment. "Martha, the Congresswoman, and I would probably vote differently on 99 out of 100 bills," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We have fundamentally different ideas about the role of government. But what I saw in that clip was not disloyalty. What I saw was a legislator doing her job." The host, surprised, started to interject, but Caldwell held up a hand. "Let me be clear," he continued. "The duty of a member of Congress is not to show fealty to the president. Their duty is to the Constitution and to the constituents who sent them there. That duty includes, and in fact demands, rigorous oversight of the executive branch. The president's view that members of Congress owe him personal loyalty is a fundamental, and I would say dangerous, misunderstanding of our entire system of government. This isn't a Republican or Democrat issue, it's an American one." Caldwell's statement was a political earthquake. It broke the partisan framing wide open. He hadn't endorsed Crockett's politics. He had defended her purpose. He gave permission for moderate and independent voters to see the issue not as a personality clash, but as a defense of democratic norms. The White House was suddenly silent on the matter. The story was no longer about an emotional freshman. It was about the separation of powers. The debate had been elevated. And in that new arena, the president's argument about personal loyalty could not survive the light of day. 2 weeks after the hearing, Jasmine Crockett stood before a crowd not of journalists, but of her own constituents in a packed community center in South Dallas. She had deliberately chosen this venue for her first public comments on the firestorm. There were no cable news cameras, only local press, and a sea of familiar faces. The teachers, nurses, small business owners, and retirees she represented. During the question and answer session, a man in the back stood up. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his voice earnest, "we saw what they did to you, what the president said, the things people are writing online. We're proud of you, but we're worried too. Aren't you afraid?" Crockett offered him a small, reassuring smile. She walked to the front of the stage, closer to the crowd, and gripped the microphone. "Thank you for asking that," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet strength. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it's easy. I'm not going to pretend the threats and the ugliness don't exist. They do. But being afraid is a luxury we can't afford when people's lives are on the line. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. There's been a lot of talk about loyalty this past couple of weeks. They tell me I should be loyal. So let me tell you, right here, right now, what loyalty means to me. Loyalty isn't blind obedience to a person or a political party. Loyalty is a promise. It's the promise I made to every single one of you when I asked for your vote. The promise that I would be your voice in Washington. The promise that I would fight for your families as hard as I would fight for my own. The promise that I would hold power accountable for you. My job, she continued, her voice rising with conviction, is to ask the hard questions on your behalf. My purpose is to make sure that a mother in Dayton, Ohio, or a father right here in Dallas is never just a number on a spreadsheet. That is my loyalty. It's not disloyalty to my country. It is the very definition of the oath I took. My loyalty is to you, and as long as I have the privilege of serving you, I will not be quiet. A wave of applause erupted, rising from a few hands to a thundering, standing ovation that filled the room. It was an affirmation, a shared understanding. The noise from Washington felt 1,000,000 miles away. Here, her message was simple, clear, and true. She had taken the president's attack and reforged it into a shield, defining her purpose on her own terms, in her own house, surrounded by her own people. 1,000 miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Brielle Turner watched a clip of Crockett's town hall speech on her phone, sitting at her kitchen table. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. After Crockett's reply to her video, her story had been picked up by national news. A crowdfunding campaign started by a stranger had raised enough money to cover her son's daycare for the next 2 years. More importantly, hundreds of parents from her area had reached out, sharing similar stories of losing vital support and feeling powerless. She felt a connection to a community she never knew she had. Crockett's words, "Loyalty is a promise," struck a deep chord within her. The congresswoman had kept her promise. Now, Brielle felt a new sense of purpose stirring within her. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a voice. The following Saturday, Brielle stood nervously behind a makeshift lectern in the basement of a local church. The room was stuffy and crowded with 30 other parents, all sitting on mismatched folding chairs. A handmade banner hung behind her, reading, "Miami Valley Parents for Action." It was their first meeting. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded a piece of paper. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, this time louder. "Thank you for coming. A few weeks ago I felt completely alone. I felt like the people in charge, the ones making decisions in Washington, didn't see us. I felt like we were just numbers on a piece of paper. And honestly, for a minute there, the president himself kind of confirmed that." A few parents nodded, murmuring in agreement. "But then," Brielle continued, finding her rhythm, "a congresswoman from Texas who had never met me showed me something different. She showed all of us something different. She proved that one voice, amplified by others, can make them listen. She stood up for me, for all of us. She said her loyalty was to us." Brielle looked up from her notes, making eye contact with the faces in the crowd. Tired, worried, but now hopeful. "Well, now we have to be loyal to each other," she said, her voice filled with a newfound conviction. "We have to organize. We have to share our stories. We have to make a list of our demands and take them to our local officials, our state reps, and anyone else who will listen. We have to make sure they can never, ever pretend they don't see us or hear us again." The small crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't a standing ovation in a grand hall, but in the quiet basement of a Dayton church, it was the start of something powerful. The echo of an act of defiance in Congress had become a chorus of voices, a grassroots movement born from one mother's pain and one leader's promise, ready to demand their seat at the table. What do you think is more powerful? A president's demand for loyalty or a politician's promise to their constituents? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories they don't want you to hear.